Hey, everybody, welcome to a totally random Lawyer Forward Live on a Friday. I have not done one of these in a while because I should have just gone to therapy and avoided all of this social media stuff. Would have been easier. But my buddy, Chris White, hi, Chris,
Hey,
called me and want to talk through some ideas. And so I thought it would be cool to talk through some of these ideas with you all together because I think Chris is facing something that many of us are facing. The big question is, how do I take my experience, what I've learned in my law firm, in my professional experience, and turn it into other ways to make money? So, not just selling bespoke person to person legal services, but what are other ways that I can sort of turn that into money? So before we dig into that, I just want to give you guys a heads up. You can ask questions, and I think it will show up in this tool that we're using. We're using a tool called Ecamm for Live. So it should be showing up live in the Facebook group. Ha ha ha. We don't know if that's actually happening. But if it is, you can post questions in the thingamajig. We can pull them up. We can have a conversation with you. All that said, we'll post this on the Facebook or on the podcast as well, the Lawyer Forward podcast as well. So you'll be able to get it there. Obviously, if you're listening to us on your podcast player, you can't ask us questions, dummy, because that's not how the technology works. So, but for the rest of you, you can. Chris, how are you today?
I'm good, Mike. One, you're awesome. Two, I feel like we need to get that out of the way. And two, I really have missed talking to you because I feel like over the pandemic, I met you. We got to talk like every month, and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
it was off
Yeah.
off the chart.
Well, actually, this sounds like a tangent, but it's not really. One of the things that happened during the pandemic was a lot of my revenue, a lot of the way my business was built shifted. And so a lot of the flywheels changed. And we're going to talk about flywheels later, which
Yep.
is how does one thing that you created feed another thing? So it's not just separate stacks of activities, but how do they feed each other? And for a while there, I had a set of separate activities, things that did not contribute to each other. They weren't working together. And specifically, a lot of the stuff that I was doing for lawyers, that it just didn't, the economics didn't work, the attention didn't work. It made a lot more sense to do it with brands the way that I was doing it. But I will say, as introduction for me personally, that has shifted a lot. And so I want to get back to helping lawyers where I can, which I guess means I have to talk to you some more.
I apologize.
It's a downer. We saw each other, dear viewer. Chris and I saw each other at Clio in passing. It wasn't long enough because if you went to Clio, you know that was basically the Rainforest Cafe as a hotel. It was. You couldn't find anybody. There was so much noise. It was ridiculous. Events are top of mind right now as I'm thinking about lawyers, but
Yeah.
let's get into it. For those of you watching again, just remember you can ask questions and we'll be able to answer them. We appreciate you joining us. So, Chris, to start, I want to frame out something that I wrote about in Lawyer Forward, and the reason is because I don't think I wrote enough about it. I think it was actually a bigger deal than I realized at the time as I was just sort of braining this out. As you know, as I am wont to do, I just dropped some brain vomit and who knows what's good, what's not. Some of the stuff sticks. And the thing that has stuck for me that we're talking about today is shifting from cash flow mindset to asset mindset.
Yeah.
And the reason is that a law firm is really good for cash flow. As with all professional services, I graduated and within a few months, you take the bar and you get your license and you get admitted to the state. And pretty much right away, I was able to charge $250 an hour
Yeah.
just for being there. And now you have this great machine where you can go work an hour and you get $250. I mean, obviously, it's not that simple, but professional services are great for cash flow. However, they are not great for creating assets. When you go to sleep in your law firm does not exist, right? That was the
Yep.
downside of that sort of cash flow focus. And so one of the things I talk about in Lawyer Forward is how can you take what you learned in your cash flow focused business, which is great because you need that cash flow, and turn them into sustainable assets. One of the books that I hate for a lot of reasons, but that really created a foundation for me on this was Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave the example of his rich dad, who was this guy who just ran a bunch of businesses. One of those businesses was a restaurant. So I want to talk to you about your terrible decision to make a restaurant. Okay, maybe it wasn't a terrible decision, but talk to me about this.
Well,
So here you were in your law firm. You know, you're
yeah.
plenty busy, but you start to create margin. Your cash flow starts to create margin. You've got extra time, you've got extra brain space, you're a bit entrepreneurially bored. You want to do the next thing. What led you to a restaurant? What were you after? Tell me about that experience of starting a restaurant.
500% is just I make poor life decisions. But no, the reality of it is it was stemmed out of a conversation because and anybody who does know, I live in a rural area. So our food options are necessarily limited. And we live in a highly Amish area, so it's either carbs or yellow things on your plate most of the time, chickens and all that stuff, which is all well and good. But we were discussing, my partners and I, how we really are proud of all the food sourcing we have, but we want to take a way to elevate that and express it in a way that it isn't currently being expressed in our market. And we said, can we do this? And so we started doing the research and we're like, wow, we can source 60, 70, almost 80% of what we need in our food stuff within a 30-mile bubble around where we are. And let's go ahead and give this a shot. And so we've been working on it for 8 months. We just, we're in our third week of our soft opening and still figuring things out, still figuring out what's going on. And so the decision was we wanted a place. We wanted some place we could be proud of. We wanted a way to elevate and express what was available in our local community in a way that wasn't currently being expressed and that probably wouldn't be if somebody didn't just grab the bull by the horns and make it happen. And so restaurants, the joke is, how do you make $100,000 in a restaurant? You start with 200. That is that is very true in a whole range of aspects because it is a highly intensive investment with a lot of risk because, food doesn't hold, and so you got to move this stuff and you got to not waste this stuff. And so why do the restaurant? We wanted a place we could be proud of, which I think almost any entrepreneur, why do something? They want something that they can look to and say, I did that.
Yeah.
And so we wanted that.
So it's like a farm to table type restaurant.
Yep.
Yeah. So local, part of the local vibe. So let's think about that a little bit analytically because it's going to set up how we're talking about what your next thing is and maybe the next thing and the next thing and maybe illustrative for the people who are trying to make decisions. So you have a law firm, and I think as you and I have talked about your law firm, you had certain strategic strengths. There were things about your law firm that work differently than other law firms. Specifically, as we've talked about before, when you joined the Lawyer Forward Virtual a couple of years ago, at the beginning of the pandemic, that should be done in a couple months. That didn't work that way. But your strategic advantage is you are rural, and one of the things that I've talked about to lawyers who are rural is being a rural attorney, and I found this to be my experience. It's almost like you're an audience builder. You're because even though you're not like targeted to some very niche kind of user, rural areas are kind of niche in terms of the people that they have similar legal problems across all these different communities. They're highly underserved. And so in the book, I talked about this idea of these networked kinds of firms. You've sort of built that. So
yes,
from your firm, you have certain strengths, being, about how people think in rural areas, about some of the community lacks. That oftentimes you're acting as a social worker as much as a lawyer because you're one of the few professionals that they see in that environment. How did those strategic strengths turn you to this particular business, or was this just a scratching your own itch kind of thing, which is something we can talk about?
I mean, yeah, the fact that we're called the Cider Press and we serve ciders is a very selfish desire because I enjoy cider myself and there isn't really anybody in the market locally doing it. But to your point, the strategy and ideations and relationship building that I've learned in my practice are one-to-one with the restaurant. I mean, it's both service-based. One is just serving food. The other is serving the needs of the legal needs in the community. But ultimately what you're doing is you're networking, you're creating relationships, you're building an identity and a brand that goes, I can go here and get what I'm looking for. And at the restaurant, the idea is those relationships and those networks, those niche that you talked about in a rural community, can be tapped in the same way as you're doing it in a legal service environment. I'm always tapping my risk management people. I'm always tapping my, accountants, my bankers. I'm looking at those people going, I need your resources to solve this person's problem because we're it.
So
In the same way, the restaurant, we can do that.
Was the strength basically, and this was the argument in Rich Dad Poor Dad, was basically once you learn how to run a business, you can run basically any business. It sounds like the strengths that transferred from one to the other was, where basically how to run a business in a rural area. Let's try another business. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So why not start a ditch digging company? Why not start a plumbing company? Why not start how did you think through the restaurant specifically?
Well, that falls into the market analysis component of things. When we look at what's available in this market, why not a ditch digging company? Well, because there's 5 and they're killing it. Why not a roofing company? Because there's dozens of them. What was missing that we wanted to participate in? And I think that second part can sometimes get in front of it. What do you want to do? Can sometimes get in front of doing the strategic analysis.
Sorry,
and what we saw, it can, and it shouldn't necessarily, because if you let what you want to do drive you forward, you may start something in a market that isn't needing it.
Well, to that point, I will say, for those of you who know my background, we could have a conversation about legal technology, right? A lot of lawyers will go and they'll say, I have this problem in my firm. I'm going to go solve that. There's a lack. I'm going to go hire some coders. I see all the bros with all their fancy cars and we're going to go start it. And then they go scratch their own itch and they find out that this problem wasn't a monetizable problem. It's not a known problem. It's not a bleeding neck problem. It's not one they didn't do the market analysis like you're talking about. They don't know how likely they don't have an economic model for distribution, for figuring out how do we get in front of people, what's our sales do we have sales people? Are we marketing first? There's all kinds of analysis. All that happens is they scratch their own itch, they make a really fancy thing, and they go out into the world and they say, what the hell is wrong with you guys? Why are you not buying this thing? I'm imagining that the risk of that was high when you decided to start a restaurant.
Absolutely. But what we also did was we didn't allow that to just guide us. We did that analysis. We did the engagement. We talked to the community. We said, what is missing? And as we looked around, one, my partners are vegetarian. There is almost no vegetarian option available for anybody in a limited dietary sense around here. Right. Two, there is a great place to go get a burger and pub style stuff. There's a great place to go get Mexican. There's a great place to go get pizzas. We got them coming out the yin yang. And obviously Amish food is everywhere, that is. But nobody was trying to take these local sources and elevate them in a more in a more specific manner. And so what we said is, how can we meet that opportunity? There's nobody in this space. We see the analysis. There's a ton of other things I could go into that you don't care about our county and the fact that we're the second richest county to Franklin County, which is Columbus in Ohio, with only 43,000 people.
Oil money,
and so there's no, just tourism money and manufacturing money, and so there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into that analysis. But what we saw was we're not going to be a $60 a plate restaurant, but there's room at the $25 to $35 plate range that is just not being met, that we need to try and meet that area in a unique way with a vegetarian option, with protein options that are awesome. And so, we did the analysis, we talked about it, we planned, and there's a huge amount of risk in doing a restaurant. The market will tell us if we are going to make it or not. But it wasn't just, I'm going to go out and scratch my itch to find this happen. And you've got to put that analysis up front and be humble enough to go, I may like cider, but nobody else cares about it.
But I think that's okay for the brainstorming phase. And so we're not going to dig totally into it, but I would point people to, I did a piece for Clio at the beginning of the pandemic that was about how to sort of filter your ideas. And it's over at clio.com/new normal, I believe. And the ebook is called Defining Your New Normal. What I put in there was a borrowed idea of the double diamond methodology for brainstorming. And what the diamond refers to is at the front end of your decision making, you have divergent thinking. It opens, right? Like it's the side of the diamond that opens. And you should be throwing all kinds of it should be as simple as I like apple cider, for Pete's sake. So I'm going to put that up on the board as a set of ideas. And then you do convergent thinking. And the thing that's interesting about the double diamond method is, so convergent thinking is then I cut back, right? I brainstorm broad and then I cut back. That's the other side of the first diamond. The thing about the second diamond that's interesting is there's one diamond for defining the problem and there's another diamond for defining the solution, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to frame for what you did. There was divergent thinking about, holy crap, we don't have a restaurant. What could we do? We could have any kind of restaurant. And then you came to the problem of we need a new restaurant, right? Sorry, let me reframe that. You sat in your office and thought we can build any kind of business, right? But before you decided to go start building a restaurant, you had to first define what kind of business do you want to create. That led you to the restaurant. Then you started thinking about what restaurant solution there is. So I would say to any of you lawyers who are sitting here thinking, I have an itch to scratch, you might be jumping to the solution too fast because you don't know yet if it's a problem that anybody cares about. Does that make sense?
I makes 100%. Yet, and I love what you talk about because I've read your stuff that you do on that, and I have something similar. You start with that huge open end, and it narrows down to what is viable or at least worth the shot. Right. And you've got to be humble enough to go, where I started with my inspiration on this may not be where I end up on it. And that can be challenging, especially if you have an entrepreneurial itch, which you were right. You're very fair and say, I am one of those people that if I sit on my hands too long, I'm going to explode. Yeah. And so I've got to continue to try to do new things. But I also have a high failure tolerance. So
yeah, you should just take therapy. But
what? I go to Twitter.
Yeah, who needs therapy when we got Twitter? Well, I wanted to pivot as we talk about this to, you've got a new project. My thinking on my projects has changed a lot. Let me tell you guys a little bit about my own projects and sort of how I disappeared for a while from kind of from the two lawyer space, and why that has changed back. And I'm going to make this distinction by saying I think the rich dad story was wrong. I think the way the rich dad guy did things, where he said, I'm really good at running a business, I'm going to run another business and another business and another business, that was a not optimal way to do it. Because there were no flywheels, to use Jim Collins's term. There was no feedback. There was no making this stronger made this stronger. He had the way I hear people talk about it is sets of cups. Like, you don't talk about a system of cups. Those cups don't interact with you. You don't have a bunch of plastic cups and they're working with each other. You have sets of cups. They're just individual cups and they do their thing and they don't really strengthen each other. A set is different from a system. A system feeds itself, right? It grows as one piece grows, another piece grows. So, to give an example, before I started doing work for legal technology companies, I would help lawyers. I mean, there was a period where I was going into law firms and doing consulting and helping them create legal supply chain managers and some of the stuff that's talked about in the book. And really hard work, really hard to sell, and it didn't feed the other projects that I was doing. It felt like I needed to do it. It felt like it was sort of my duty. It was the safe thing. It was the next logical thing. And so I went and consulted to lawyers. I didn't want to practice law, but I knew enough about law practice that I could help lawyers do it. Now that I work for these legal technology companies, it got to the point where it was like every minute I was spending with lawyers was a money-losing time, right? Because I could have had a brand pay me to do it for them. So what was I building? What was I doing over here? There was no feedback loop. And then I realized that the holdup with these companies, what these companies need is talent. They need lawyers who give a crap, who are happy with speaking in public, writing, teaching, whatever it is. We call it content marketing, but it's just being public intellectuals. It's the role of a lawyer from time immemorial, right? To show up and to teach and to speak and to share. So now you see a flywheel. Now, if I help lawyers become creators, not help them run a law firm, not help them hire, not help them do logistics and operations and the stuff I was initially teaching, but how do you become a writer? How do you become a speaker? How do you become a teacher? That feeds the other side of the business, where I can now go to these legal technology companies and say, hey, let me be your Ryan Seacrest with my perfect hair, and I will bring over this talent. That's a flywheel. I am saying all of that to lay out a question to you about your next project. The question is, why lawyers? So I'm going to give you the floor for a minute to tell me about what you and I talked about on the phone last week, which is a project that you got in mind and how it serves the rest of what you're doing. What was the idea? Where did it come from? Let's put it through the double diamond. Is this the solution? But let's start with the double diamond. What was the idea?
So the idea is something that we're referring to, the idea of the black box that's in the airplane. It's a sealed box. Information goes in, and if there's a catastrophe, then you can pull it out. But nobody really knows what's in there until for the entire life of that box, if nothing ever goes wrong. And using that illustration, we forever, until I really started digging into it, treated marketing and brand as a black box. You put money in, something happens, and on the other side, you hope clients come out. And so we really started as a firm trying to unpack that. And so the new endeavor that we have is 5 years worth of our experience of unpacking it, to the point of measuring legal markets, to giving people defined targets, developing viable client profiling, and start to open up that box and not just observe what's happening, but start manipulating what's happening inside of there. So that no longer it's just, hey, I'm putting in money hoping something else is going to come out the other side, but going, I can actually intentionally change the outcome of this over time by developing understanding of what's happening. So that's the idea. The idea is that we could take what we've learned that took us from 40 intakes a month to 150 intakes a month in 5 years, with a conversion rate of like 67% and a net promoter score close to 80%, that we've learned how to do. And how could we help other lawyers? And now I think this is super important, and I know I'm going to get a little wishy-washy here on you for a second, but why lawyers? I fundamentally believe, with no bullshit, that lawyers have the greatest potential impact for good in their communities of almost any profession in the world right now. A lawyer who is set up well, who is equipped well, who is running a practice that is taking care of them and their needs, can do more good in their communities than almost any other profession can. But the problem is, lawyers are often at the mercy of their practice, scrambling behind the ball of their practice because they don't know why what's happening is happening. They're just solving the next problem that's going on in front of them. And so they are lessening their own impact due to the anxieties that their practice and their operations, and specifically marketing and branding, they don't know how to get the people in the door that are going to help them pay the bills to allow them to accomplish whatever mission or goals they have in the first place.
So if we're going to retrofit this sort of ideation into this double diamond, it sounds like what you were going at the beginning with was, I want to help lawyers connect with people better, right? So you toss on the wall, why are lawyers not having the impact, right? Like, so let's say that is the big driving thing at the beginning, and your world of opportunities, you thought, lawyers just are not having the impact that they should be having. The problem that you end up in your convergent thinking and the other side of the diamond is, all right, let's get down to what's the big problem. The big problem is they don't know how to create a buyer. They don't know how to create a client, right? They don't know how to create that client relationship. So then you do divergent thinking again, which is I could come up with all kinds of ways to help them do that. What you end up with is sort of it sounds like a consultancy mostly. Are you guys doing services as well, where you're helping them do ad buys or whatever?
We will be for sure. So, but okay. the upfront, the product, the service is empowering lawyers to actually understand what their market is and who they're aiming at.
Right. So an education heavy sort of consultancy that happens to do some services, but the core
absolutely.
thing is, yeah.
Absolutely. Because the reality of it is, and you and I talked about this last week, and so I'm going to throw this out there and we can place it in the Double Diamond wherever we want it to go.
Sure.
Is fundamentally, this is a service that's centered around marketing and branding, but actually it's about what the lawyer wants from their career. It's really about them and their profession and their practice and what they want from it. It just, as you've said, marketing happens to be one of those bleeding neck problems that we didn't go to law school to figure that out. We didn't get a business degree to start picking apart legal markets. And in fact, most people don't have the slightest clue what the size of their legal market is. And in alignment with that lack of knowledge, they live in anxiety to it. They live in anxiety in relationship to their client base and to their potential market, which leads to poor decision making surrounding that. I mean, how many you were a lawyer for a short amount of time, Mike. That first time you opened up, how much anxiety surrounded the fact of when's that phone going to ring?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that and that's existential, right? Like if you can't figure that, if you can't crack that, I mean, you can't deliver any good. There was a guy that advised me once who I just really did not like this person at all, but he did say something very smart to me, which was if somebody's in court trying to get access to their kid, the last thing they want is for that lawyer to be standing there worried about whether the light bulbs are going to work, whether the electricity is still going to be on. That people want the lawyer to be sustainable so that they can do the work. All right. Well, that all makes sense. And I had asked you a question last week when we talked that I think might have been answered by what you just said, which is why not use the strengths that you already have in the rural community and teach rural communities how to, some of these community businesses, how to succeed, right? Because it's a similar network, it's a similar strength in terms of understanding the area. And it sounds like the why is the why, right? Like the reason that you want to try to solve this particular problem is because you feel a sense of mission in solving that. Tell me, I'm going to ask you to be self-critical and tell me why that's risky. If you're advising another lawyer who is thinking about some tool that they want to create or some process or some new product, how can mission get in the way of making a sustainable decision in terms of a new product or process?
Absolutely. Well, I think that is not an unfair question at all in asking, because I think what my mission is directly opposing or directly in alignment with their anxiety, in the sense that this. Why pay a guy to do something I don't understand anyway, and I don't know why I'm paying him to do it? Therefore, I'm just going to keep doing what I can do that's generating some form of result. There is a risk analysis that's not actually done, just felt, in anxiety to that. When you believe that your legal market is a finite resource and you don't know that it can ever come back up again, and you don't know where the next one's going to come from, and you live in anxiety to that, somebody who comes in, even with the best of intentions and winning smile that I might have, and says, I can help you for a fee. Why? Why would I do that? Sure, you had some success with it, but I fundamentally, my mission doesn't speak into their anxiety to that level. And so it actually takes faith, which is weird to talk about in the midst of a consulting, to say, I have to address my own relationship to this market before I can even accept help inside of it.
Meaning, to go back to my friend Nika Kabiri, who I spent some days with in Decisions, and your own bias, how do you check your bias, right? So your inclination to say, all right, I want to go serve lawyers, and the reason is because I care about them as people, and I care about their mission because it speaks to my own mission and my own practice. And so now if I can spread that, maybe it's a story I tell myself about myself that I can go out and be that person. How do you check your own biases? How do you make sure that you're not doing something that is unsustainable because either you're scratching an itch that only you have, or you're scratching an itch that's better scratched if you just went to therapy, right? Like, how do you remove yourself from that decision?
So we've been in process of this over the last 36 months, which is weird because you and I started talking about 36 months ago, you
Right.
know? And so it's been in process. A good friend of ours, Melissa Shanahan, actually let me test my
Mm,
presumptions about this with a group of 18 attorneys across the United States and Canada last fall. Because I went, maybe it's just me.
yeah.
Maybe I'm just, it's my problem that I've had with this, and my anxieties are driving me to try and create a solution for somebody else that they don't need. We spent 6 weeks together. I taught them everything that I had learned about measuring the size of their legal marketplace, building a viable client profile, and just taught them all of these things. And the conversations I've had during that mastermind that we did and since then have shown me that that was the very first time they ever felt like they knew how to find the answers.
Mm,
That these things existed in an unknown to them, creating anxiety. They didn't like the fact that they would spend money on marketing and didn't know they didn't even know how to measure the results. They didn't even know if the results that if they got any reports, how to even read them. Kind of sounds like everybody who hires a lawyer. you
right.
know, the same kind of, we're at the mercy of the marketers in the same way. And so there was an empowerment and equipping that allowed me to check myself first and go, let me teach you this. If this has an impact, then
Yeah.
we can see that this might be meeting a need
Yeah. No,
instead of just my own therapeutic itch.
right. I love the idea of doing a small size experiment. I'm going to point people back to that Clio resource that I wrote, clio.com/new normal, because the driving theory behind that piece was I was in everybody's shoes who's watching this. When you own your own practice, you don't have the margin. You have good cash flow, but not good enough margin to go blow it on some massive experiment. You don't have an R&D budget. You don't have,
Yeah.
a team that Procter and Gamble has that we know 20% of our revenue is going to go to finding new things. You guys don't have 20% in profit, much less let me go put that into an R&D budget. So the driving thing with that piece for Clio was go do it on paper. And there's something in there called the Legal Innovation Canvas where you can go put in your idea. Just no matter how big or small the idea is, go put it in there. It's going to ask you, why are you doing this? Who's it for? What jobs are you trying to answer for? What's your logistics? How do you do it? And what's the money side of it? How do we make sure that the money works? So definitely put it on paper first. But then I like that idea of let me find a small scope experiment. Let me go use
Mm-hmm.
my connection with Melissa to get a number of lawyers together, see if they're interested in that. Give us some more ideas for how you might experiment. What if you have a business idea tomorrow, which you will? You're going to go buy a domain name because you will. You're going to buy some Moleskine notebooks to write down, okay, this has now become about me. I have a lot of Moleskine notebooks and a lot of domain names. You're going to come up with some idea. What other methods for small scale experiments have you tried or might you come up with?
Yeah, actually, I have two more that I did on top of that with Melissa. I took the time to generate the formulas and write. I never submitted it to anywhere, but I took the time to write a full-fledged like white paper
Yeah.
on how to do this, and then disseminated it through friends in on our network that were interested in this, and then solicited their feedback.
Mm,
And so it was an attempt to try to express this stuff in in a logical, consistent manner that then I went out and ultimately, if you're trying the business out at the first time, you're waiting for the market to tell you if they even understand it. Well,
right.
during this time that I had that I could do this, I submitted it to peers and then people in the field. And I said, does this make sense? If it
Mm,
doesn't, why not?
yeah.
And so I did that with my market analysis formula that I generated to start with the basics of what the size of a legal market is. And then I also did that with the viable client process and formula and put two different articles together, distributed them to people, solicited feedback, and got some real insights into what was even making sense in my
Mm,
thought process.
yeah.
And so that was apart from actually trying it with Melissa and writing an entire curriculum with her for a 6 week mastermind. I disseminated these ideas in a written form that I was like, well, this is going to have to get written down at some point in time. It just can't exist in my head. So I did that work too. And the feedback I got was helpful,
Yeah.
tremendously helpful in
Yeah,
trying to figure out what I needed to say.
totally. I love the idea of using content as a way to put the idea out into the universe and see what the response is. What I'll often do, I'll just reveal something to you guys. One of the things that I've been thinking about in terms of helping lawyers become creators is this how to help lawyers get their personality back in their writing, because we go to law school and it just really depersonalities us. And so one of the phrases I use in the book a lot is be yourself loudly. I have thought in my head about essentially a writing course for lawyers called Be Yourself Loudly, how to get your personality back into your writing, right? And, I'll do that a lot where if I've got an idea and something I want to bat around, I'll say, what if this were a book? What would the book be called? What would the subtitle be, right? The book title helps me figure out, is there something catchy? The subtitle helps me figure out what is the problem I'm solving for. And if I can do, if that is like the plainest, easiest, lowest input experiment, can I come up with a freaking book title? Because if I can't, it's not worth doing. But then I went and put it on Twitter. Hey, anybody think I should do this? And then I'll go make it a blog post. Hey, what do you guys think about this? I will say, though, one of the things that, again, my friend Nika, I just saw her give a talk this last week, talks about is you got to figure out how to only use each of these things as a data point, because otherwise you might oversample. If you put something out and your mom is like, dude, you are the smartest person. Okay, my mom never gave me that level of validation, but you know what I'm saying? Like if whatever the feedback is, even if it's your gut, if your gut is saying to you, I should do this, and abductive reasoning is a real thing, maybe you pull from your gut. But what Nika would say is these are just data points. These are individual data points. So for you, as you're thinking through making some of these decisions, how many data points do you need to move to the next step? How long are you doing iterations? And when do you have enough data to say, I'm going all in, I'm going to make this thing happen?
So we decided, let me jump to the end of your question. We decided in May that we were going to invest in the team to start developing it internally. So I have what some other firms don't have. I've got 10 attorneys, that work for me, and we serve, 40 different practice areas. I have a ripe field for experimentation and R&D inside of that. And I can do those things where others might be going, I don't have that flexibility. So what I did, though, was for 2 years, write things down, solicit feedback, try the mastermind, talk to people individually, work with my own team to not be satisfied with what we were doing and how we were spending our money and asking the questions of ROI. At the end of the day, I didn't measure all of them, but I would say I probably have at least 12 different data points that led me to the decision to go, we're going to do this.
Yeah.
Now, I learned a whole lot along the way that if I could go back and we had hours, pull out, this is what I originally thought. And I was so wrong with that, and it didn't express itself in the same way that I thought it was going to at the end of the day. But it was time and the willingness to express and re-express and redraft and re-put it out there and experiment. But that's, I think right there, the core of what you're asking about with your double diamond stuff, Mike, is you got to be willing to express it and try it at some level, even if it's not a full-fledged, I'm in and it's open, I'm trying this new entity. You've got to be willing to let that publicly be known and fail.
Right.
And that can be for people who grew up on the Socratic method of teaching that you're never going to be right enough, and being wrong can be publicly humiliating. When you have tried something and it fails publicly, that can be demoralizing. And that can keep, just the idea of that happening can hold back so many great ideas that just need to start circulating.
Gosh, we could talk about failure all day. I think to your point, the idea is that your principles don't matter until it takes something from you to have principles, right?
Yeah.
And in this case, your ideas don't matter really until they're exposed enough that you can be made fun of for having that idea, right? Until you put it out there to the point that other people can engage with it, you haven't really come up with an idea. You've come up with like a passing. Like my wife just texted me literally while we were talking. She said, would be a great name for a plant company that we could start? Plant Parenthood. and I think it's an
Money,
indication.
money.
Yeah, it's coming falling off the trees. This is what it's like for my wife and I. Well, I want to perform a small experiment right now with you. We have, let's say a few hundred people will end up who are lawyers who have a similar itch to what
Yeah.
you had when you started this. They are going to have some questions about what the black box is, about how they get some kind of consulting about how to turn up their client creation, how to serve people at the top of their license, and all these things that we talk about to do that noble work. What is the best way for people to reach out to you? And for those of you who are listening or watching, I want you to do this. If this is a subject that's interesting to you, or if you hate it, tell Chris, this is
Yes.
dumb, right? Like, why are you doing this? Whichever it is, let's get Chris some data, some feedback. Chris, what's the best way for people to reach out to you to give you that feedback?
So there is a website for Black Box. If people are like, hey, I want to look at a little bit more of this itself, it's blkbox.consulting. So it's really cool, really hip with the consulting instead of .com.
Nice.
So blkbox.consulting. I'm on the Facebooks, the Instagrams, the Twitters. I tag Mike in as much as I can on Twitter because he's the most popular person I know on there. And so, but they can find me, they can ask me. And I want to reiterate though what you just said. This is part of that putting it out there process. You invited me. I asked you if I could talk about this. You invited me to put it out there as a challenge to see what it would land. I need to know. This is part of that, putting it out and soliciting feedback. So 100% open to anybody who wants to say anything about this. You can also, if you're like, hey, what chops does this guy even have? You can check out my firm. It's equus.law, EQUES.LAW, equus.law. And you can see a little bit about some of the theories that we've put to work inside of that. But yeah. Throw it at me, Mike. Give me a challenge. Give me something, man.
Yeah, very cool. No, I appreciate it. And again, just to echo Chris, if you send him something that he doesn't like, he will be super mean to you. He will probably send people to your house. None of that is true. If he sends people to your house, it's to bring you pie or something. So you should totally be mean to Chris, who will send you pie. That's what I do.
Yes.
Chris, thank you for joining me. All of you watching, listening, hopefully we will bring you more episodes like this. If you want to be on Lawyer Forward Live and tell us about your experience running your firm and questions that you have, things that you're thinking about, especially as you try to become a known expert, as you try to put your expertise out into the world, I hope you'll reach out. My email is mike@lawyerforward.com, and we will talk to you all next time. Thanks again, Chris.
Thanks, Mike.